Recording started. Great. Uh, all right, I'll kick us off. So thank you everyone for coming. This is a small group, but I think we're going to have a good time. So thank you for making some time over your lunch hour to join us in what is the last workshop, formal workshop that's part of this practicum, the Reimagining Assessment Practicum, which has been our theme for the year. So Anne, why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide? Ooh, I know. Oh, look at that little dot down there. So these are the participant guidelines that have been shared with each of the programs that we've had as part of this practicum. They remain the same for this session. Please assume positive intent, take accountability for what you say, be aware of your own assumptions, expectations, judgments, etc., and just put them in the chat. And then I think we're just going to maybe lean into the commit to curiosity over certainty and identify your learning edges. This is a topic that is TILT and library research and information literacy are sort of grounded in a lot of research, but generative AI, as we all know, is a real moving target. So we're going to be definitely exploring some of that today. So thank you for coming, and Anne, go ahead and go to the next slide. We want to share here too our ongoing feedback and insights board. This has now been populated with some suggestions and feedback and comments by participants of the practicum. So we are checking this and addressing feedback that we get through this Padlet. And I think we're going to have that in the chat soon, any moment now. So if you have any feedback you'd like to share, just on an ongoing basis, you can put it in the Padlet, but we'll also be sending out an email, I believe tomorrow, with links to more information and how to provide more feedback. I'm on the Practicum content committee for the year that's developed this practicum, so we are already making changes for the winter based on feedback that we've received. So please let us know your thoughts when you can. This is also our consultant, Melissa Coe. She's working with the practicum this year, and you can schedule a time with her to talk more specifically about how to integrate some of the programming that we've had here into your own course or into a series of courses, and change up the way you've been doing some grading. So please feel free to make an appointment with her. And also, we have an ongoing learning lab for the next several weeks that allows you to give sort of a deep dive into using and implementing alternative grading strategies. And yeah, Dr. Ko is going to be leading that learning lab as well. So if you are interested in a consultation, you can sign up with her directly or think about joining that learning lab, which I think is up to around 6 or so faculty who will be joining that. So please consider that another. And Un, you're doing great with the links. They're going straight into the chat. So the learning lab sign up is over on the chat. So with that, we're going to go into our presentation. And we've titled this presentation Generative AI and Transparent Design in Research Assignments. I'm Michelle Guittar. I'm the head of instruction and curriculum support here at Northwestern University Libraries. And I'm joined today with my colleague, Ann Zald, who is government information librarian, also in instruction and curriculum support. And we really wanted to have a workshop as part of this practicum that would introduce the ideas of transparent design into working with library research assignments. And then with generative AI tools becoming more prevalent, or maybe like omnipresent might be the more correct word, we wanted to demonstrate how these tools could be integrated into considerations about library research, assignments that might deal with source analysis or analyzing authorship, and so we'll go into that as well. So for today, our learning outcomes are to apply the TILT Higher Ed's transparency framework, including purpose, task, and criteria to revise research assignments, to analyze and revise an example research assignment using the framework, and then to also think about how to guide students' interrogation and use of generative AI tools during the research process. We are not saying you can't use them and they're not good, even though they're are people who would say that. We're seeing how can we use these things as a tool integrated with this larger tilt process. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Anne to lead us through tilt and library research design.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And good morning or good afternoon. We're I don't know that this will be a drastic change or alteration from any of the other presentations in terms of the purpose of TILT. It just provides some of the research background into this approach to instructional design. TILT is an acronym, of course, Transparency in Learning and Teaching Project. It's now hosted at Brandeis University. And just to explain what that means, transparency in the learning and teaching process is defined as explicitly focusing on the how and the why students are learning the course content in particular ways. And this this transparency has been shown through research to benefit students who are unfamiliar with college success strategies, and the success and the benefits are shown to be greater for those. They are in evidence for all students, but they are shown to be a higher impact for underrepresented and first generation students. So this approach to designing and presenting your assignments and your assignments to your students is much more equitable because of the research results of that. So this is sort of an outline of that framework that you would use in thinking through and planning and discussing your assignments with students. Thinking about the purpose of why are they even doing this assignment, in terms of what skills are they going to be applying and practicing, and what knowledge will they gain from this doing your assignments. And these are shown, especially with problem-centered types of assignments, they're shown to have can you also show how it will have a long-term relevance, either to students, not just in your class, but also perhaps throughout their academic career or in their personal lives. Once the purpose is clear, what tasks will students need to do in order to accomplish that purpose? And to a certain extent, being explicit about some of the steps so that students can avoid wasting a lot of their time trying to figure it out and going off in the wrong direction. And then, of course, the criteria for success. How can you share with students how they're going to be evaluated, what you're looking for in their work, what will make their work better, to start building in that metacognitive approach for students themselves so they can self-regulate to a certain extent. The research also or providing examples of assignments and discussing with the students what they see that illustrates those criteria and where they might think it might be improved, what is missing from this example in terms of the criteria helps them to understand your approach to this assignment and how you will evaluate their own work and start to internalize that practice. The results of the research that has been done by the TILT project, they found that it boosted students' learning in 3 important ways. Then there was a medium to a large effect for underserved students. These 3 areas of student learning were impacted, and the 2 in red, academic confidence and their sense of belonging, are predictors of increased persistence and graduation. So, and improved grades. So that is the research results in terms of how it impacted students and improved their performance on their assignments, both in the course and over time. They did follow-up studies with students and found that it had a lasting effect into the second year after that course. So, so that's the framework of designing in a transparent way. I think you've probably been getting that message or are doing this already, making that framework explicit. I'm going to bring in another research project here called Project Information Literacy that's been underway since 2008 and has collected survey and interview data from more than 11,000 students across from a wide variety of different types of institutions, looking at how they find, evaluate, and use information in this rapidly changing digital information environment. There are a number of studies that PIL has done. PIL is such an unfortunate acronym, isn't it? We'll provide you a link to their website at the end of our session. But one of their earlier studies found that students reported that 76% of students in that study considered that the written guidelines that they get for course-related assignments as the most helpful information that they get in completing those assignments. So as a result of that finding, they then did a follow-up study and did a content analysis of handouts that faculty included and provided to students describing assignments in their courses. They were voluntarily submitted from a variety of faculty disciplines and different types of colleges and universities. And this is a lot of text. I'm not going to go through it all, but I think you can see what they found in terms of what those handouts had in common, what information is being communicated to students. Again, this may or may not be true of any of your assignments or anyone at Northwestern's, but there was the focus of the instructions tend to be somewhat mechanical. What is the format? It's a standard written paper. The guidance that students were given was about page limit, perhaps a citation style, the number or type of sources to use, but then the guidance in terms of how to conduct their research, how to enter into the conversation of scholarship, really focused on things that are, well, first of all, there was 6 in 10 handouts suggested students consult the show. So while faculty value browsing because they're familiar with the literature, for those novice researchers or newer to a discipline, that's kind of it's not very helpful. I'll just say that, especially in a library like ours, where we have multiple libraries within the same building and multiple call number systems. So 13% of the handouts suggested talking to a librarian. That's less than 1 in 5 handouts even mentioned consulting with a librarian, and the same for using the online databases. So students were really left to their own devices and they probably used what was most available to them and fastest and easiest, which is Google or Google Scholar. And while it does wonderful things, there are certain things that they do miss out on. That's my professional part. So with that in mind, one last slide about project information literacy. Again, I said they've done a number of studies, and this is sort of their high-level summary of their results to date. For students seeking information, 66% of students say that just defining the topic is the most difficult part of the assignment. And granted, I think that's true for first-year students as well as for PhD candidates in determining their dissertation topic. But how can we bridge that difficulty for students and guide them in some way? 80% don't ask a librarian for help, even if, and I think your faculty recommendation is the strongest hope for that. But still, students are juggling multiple classes in multiple disciplines, and they do what is expedient. So I don't think Wikipedia is necessarily as evil as it might have been perceived in the early aughts and teens, but trying to make a case here that research design and a design of research assignments using that transparent framework could improve the process for students and enhance their ability to learn. Now, Boone, if you could put the links into the chat for these 3 documents, or these 4 documents. The TILT project has created a design template to help people work through this with their own assignments, and a checklist for once you have an assignment designed, you can use that to, again, sort of interrogate your own work. And Bloom's taxonomy, as you may be well familiar. Those verbs help to cue the level of cognitive complexity that you're asking students to engage in. So thinking about how you're verbalizing your intentions and your goals for students and the criteria for success can be aided by thinking explicitly about those verbs. There's also a template for students to help them think about this as they go into your class or other classes. Because in addition to the design component, the TILT project really emphasizes having an active conversation with your students about your assignments, why you have designed them the way you have, and what you're seeking to, what type of learning you're seeking them for your students. So with those tools in mind, we have practice
Yeah, so
exercise.
I'll give us a little bit more context for this. So this was a very quick info demo of Tilt and project information literacy, and I wanted to highlight a couple things Anne said. So when we talk about information literacy too as a discipline, we often are also focusing on taking those Bloom's taxonomy action verbs and applying them to understandings of information. So do students know how to analyze a specific source based on where it's from, where they found it, or who created it and why? When we talk about defining a topic, like do students understand or know what questions to ask about a topic? Our favorite slash least favorite example is always like climate change. Like, okay, I want to study climate change. And you're like, oh my God, do you mean like sociological influences, chemical, environmental, oceans, air? Like, what are we looking at here? So, what we're trying to do in information literacy and as librarians is guide students to a deeper understanding of sources and how to use them. So this is our example that we're going to work from. And we made this up. This is a straw man example, perhaps, but this is also something that Anne noted is that this is a assignment that is highly mechanical. It's for a history course. The specifications are 8 to 10 pages, double spaced, the font size and margins, style of citations. And then we have often seen this kind of generic assignment, which is can you can you write on a topic of your choosing using a minimum of 5 scholarly sources, and include a literature review and list the works cited. It's due on the first day of reading week. And I got a message about the links. The links include spaces, so you can see like the tilthighered.com assets PDF assignment space Q, include the space with the end of the PDF, and they should come up. Um, let's see. I think like for example, the third one works because it has spaces in it. So hopefully we can get those looking right again. Um, but let's go ahead and like looking at this assignment, we want to think how could we make this assignment more integrated with the TILT framework and stress those kinds of skills that we want students to learn? Like, can we help them in any way to define a topic? Can we help them find appropriate sources? What would they need to know about those sources and to get to this paper? So with that, we wanted to go ahead and introduce a Padlet, and I think that's going to go in the chat. And we'd like to spend a few minutes seeing if you can think about how we might revise this assignment in terms of that purpose, tasks, and criteria for success to make it more integrated with the TILT framework. Like, what are the things we could define that would make this assignment more more clear for students and give them a clearer idea of both what to do and what they're going to get out of it. So the Padlet is up on the screen and it's also in the chat. And we've given you Bloom's taxonomy, the verbs to think about. And we say again, like, okay, the course is this, the paper is this. There's not, we have some ideas of examples that we could use to revise this, but we're interested in your own creativity. If you can think of anything we could add here that would make this assignment more clear. So we'll do this for like a few minutes. Let's see how many things end up on the Padlet, but we'll take like 3 minutes here to do this. Okay, I see a few things coming in. This is great. Um, so we have like for the overall purpose, like links to specific resources would definitely support that overall purpose of being able to talk about scholarship. But I think that the second one, how to contribute to a scholarly conversation as a historian, is really close to what we were thinking. Like the larger goal of this paper is not to reproduce the research or to reproduce um, just something that they found from 5 various sources. It's more about like, what is the larger goal? And the larger goal is to act as a historian or to act as a scholar who's reviewing the history of this time period and this place. Analyzing different kinds of sources is definitely also part of that, being able to interpret what would be relevant and not. And then, yeah, what we're really doing is relating these current learning objectives to like future applications in learning. When we think about tasks, yes, we can definitely define a topic that's a good task that would serve that larger purpose. And then it would really scaffold that assignment. So the student isn't trying to define a topic and do all their research and write a paper before they get any feedback. So that would be a smaller task that could be done earlier in the quarter and then build on the assignment. And so, yes, turn in an annotated bibliography earlier. Um, Practice analytical versus reflective writing. I think that's a really good suggestion too, to think about not just a source or several sources of information, but then what do they think about them? How does that reflect their perceptions of their own learning? And then, yeah, like using more of an analysis, like applying a framework to a historical event. And then criteria really becomes like, okay, how are we evaluating this work? So we've talked a little bit about using like a feedback loop, either at the defining a topic stage or reflection or scaffolding the assignment, but it could also be through a rubric. It could be giving really clear guidelines from the faculty about what is a good thesis statement or research question, demo what that actually looks like, as opposed to sort of leaving them on their own. Um, and then, yes, complying with the paper layout and format, but also being really clear about what those scholarly sources should be. Maybe it's a peer-reviewed journal article, maybe it's only reference entries, which we have a lot of, or academic book chapters. And providing a sample paper would be a slam dunk. I'd love that if I'd always had that to work from. Clear expectations, alignment to the course outcomes. So good. Okay. You all did great. Thank you for participating in our Padlet. Let's go back to so we had a couple, we weren't sure what we were going to get on the Padlet. So we had some just suggestions that Anne and I came up with. So we have the sample purpose could be like, okay, what we really want students to do, we talked about scholarly conversation. Maybe we want them to be able to use historical sources to be able to make an argument about how an event has been interpreted in different ways. So more of like a historiography assignment. We might want them, the larger goal is to read historical primary sources analytically based on their context. So where were they published, when, what did people say about it, what isn't in that primary source, what's missing from that newspaper article, or what point of view. And then we were brainstorming additional tasks like, okay, an annotated bibliography, an assignment about just a single primary source and getting deep into like analyzing a single source, and then a reflective assignment about the process of finding sources. And criteria really becomes about like, well, what makes sense in your larger course, depending on your subject or discipline or the course itself. But you could really include like a rubric. You could have a checklist. You can be reflective, as long as you're offering opportunities for feedback and reinforcing that larger cycle of the point, the purpose of doing a specific task and assignment. So let's go to the next slide. So now, with this sort of understanding of the research assignment and what we're talking about when we talk about information literacy and all of that, we want to turn to like generative AI. So in some ways, generative AI tools for librarians were a little bit like, okay, this is nothing new. We're always dealing with misinformation, unreliable sources. Um, the big disruptor, I don't know, 20 years ago was really Wikipedia, but we've all like just incorporated Wikipedia into our daily lives. There's a whole community of people trying to make Wikipedia better, but in some ways it parallels challenges we've already faced. And for faculty, it's like essay writing services have existed for a long time. There's always ways to cheat. So here's another tool that is offering sort of challenges to academic integrity, challenges with misinformation and lack of authoritative information. So we're dealing with it as librarians. Let's just say that we're dealing with it. But what we really are hoping is that we can push students to understand these tools because they are only becoming, as I said earlier, more omnipresent. The classic, everyone knows ChatGPT at this point, but there's a number of competitors to ChatGPT that are coming out that are better than ChatGPT, and it's really only a matter of time until our library vendors are also integrating AI tools, AI-based tools into like JSTOR or ProQuest or EBSCO. So we have to just reckon with the fact that this is our new reality. So what can these tools do? So it's really important for students and I guess faculty to understand that these are not storehouses of knowledge in the way that we've been thinking about them. They are not encyclopedias. They're not reference tools. What they are is like generated text. They're generating text based on relationships between words and probability. So just because something looks accurate doesn't mean it's been authored and verified to be accurate. It's some ways it's a happy mistake when things are accurate in these tools. And again, that's going to change over time. They're going to improve their models. They're going to improve their training materials, but that's still how they work. That also means they're built on training materials, so they're not neutral, they're not unbiased. It's just a part of what these things are. And what they can do, though, is they can provide us both a tool for comparing against academic research and understanding how academic research is structured just differently than what's in these generative AI tools. And they can also really assist with what we would call like the brainstorming and search strategy stage. So Anne and I worked together to come up with a couple examples that we could use to integrate Tilt and these generative AI tools, and we think they would work regardless of discipline. If you disagree, let's hear about it. So one idea we came up with is how can we compare these generative AI sources to academic sources? And I've seen this done in a couple different ways. One way is just, have students critique the output of a generative AI source based on course content or their previous knowledge. And that would be a potential way to interrogate this. But I also think it's a really interesting exercise to focus on the idea of authorship and academic authorship and who does that and what it means. So when we look at in this example, I'm going to talk about Claude, which is another tool. We'll stay on this slide for the moment. But we want to think about the purpose is, okay, can we get students to understand and use different sources to analyze information on a specific topic. So they're not going to like one source for the answer. They're not going to Wikipedia, but how can they take two different sources and think about them differently as different kinds of information? So a specific task could be compare information found in Claude with an academic reference source. But that could be swapped out for Wikipedia, for a peer-reviewed journal article, for a book. Like it's pretty customizable. And then to the criteria would be, variable based on preference, but we really want to understand, like, can the students demonstrate an understanding of these two different sources through a specific analytical frame? So in this case, I'm going to stick with authorship as sort of the criteria frame for thinking about that. So go to the next slide now. I think I'm ready. So this is Claude. And so Claude is a tool that's produced by Anthropic. And you may not have heard of this tool yet, but Amazon just invested like billions of dollars in Claude. So it's going to be somewhere in the Amazon universe soon, if it's not there already. So I'm the Latin American Studies librarian. I didn't say that. So my examples are about Latin American history. So I wanted to ask Claude something that would be too big to really understand easily. Like if you go to the Wikipedia page on the Aztec Empire, it's like a billion pages long. But I was like, okay, let's ask Claude, can you please provide me information, like what events led to the fall of the Aztec Empire in Mexico? All right. So it generated this relatively short summary, and you can see I had to kind of glue things together. But it generated this relatively quick summary of the key events, starting in the early 16th century. In 1519 this happened, 1520 this happened, and then the disease came and further decimated the Aztec Empire. So it gives me this like quick overview, and I think that this is really interesting to tell students, to ask them these questions. So my hope is like you would be asking students these questions, or we could in the library if this was a library visit. We would ask them, is this information general or specific? And we would say, well, this is really general. Is this text written by anyone? There's no evidence here of any authorship. This is generated text. It's not authored by a specific person with a specific set of expertise. This is generated. Claude, unlike ChatGPT, can generate a specific list of books about a topic, and they're accurate. They're real books. So note that. But there is definitely in here, there can be factual inaccuracies. There's no citations. It's still considered like this is general information for a general audience for a general purpose. And with a lot of internet tools, that's what we say. Like, I'm not going to say you can't use these tools or Wikipedia is bad, but let's be clear about what the purpose of this is. It's not to write a paper. It's general information. So let's go to the next slide. Oh yes, I contrasted this with one of our library resources, the Encyclopedia of Empire. So this is a online encyclopedia that we have access to. We have access to hundreds or thousands of these, and it's something that lives in Wiley, which is a academic publisher. And this is an example where like this is a very long article. So we could have used Wikipedia. In this case, I wanted to highlight library resources. And right away, there's things to talk about. This is not a quick and dirty summary of the fall of the Aztec Empire. This is long. It's written with citations. It has much more specific details about the events that might have been mentioned in that Claude text. And it also is peer-reviewed, and it's peer-reviewed like as an article, and then it's published by an academic publisher. One thing to note too is it has an actual author, and that author is not a random person. They're affiliated with I think it's California State University, San Bernardino, at the time of this writing. But I've done this exercise, a similar exercise with students in a class, and they'll realize, oh, my professor knows this person personally. Like, this is actually a real network of real people who communicate and share ideas. So it becomes like much more meaningful to put this in front of students and ask them these same questions like who wrote this? What's its purpose? How do you access it? And what does that mean about its purpose? It's not something that's just general audience material. It's for you as a baby scholar. This is for you. So let's go ahead and look at the next slide. Um, so the other sample task that we would that I've sort of presented is about search strategies. And this one gets into like some sort of bread and butter stuff for librarians. So hopefully you can stay with me here. um, but one of the other big challenges we know students have is finding information. So where are they searching? How are they searching? Are they finding the relevant sources? And both Anne and I have had plenty of experiences with students where they're like, well, I searched JSTOR and I can't find any information about this. Or I searched some highly specific thing in the library catalog, so there must not be any information on this. And so search strategies and developing a search strategy is really one of those things that we know students need help on. And if it were integrated into assignments, it would make the rest of the assignment in some ways flow much more easy for them. So the larger purpose of this would be we want students to be able to search for information, academic information, no, general information. No, I'm just going to say information, not going to be specific, on a topic. So the task could be use ChatGPT to develop a Boolean search strategy on a specific historical topic, and I'll explain what Boolean is in a minute. And then iterate your search at least once, and then use that search string in new search and describe the first 10 results. So not just what are the 10 results, but describe them. So think about their authorship or chronology or anything, and you can define what you want to do. And then the criteria will be perhaps a description of how you iterated the search, what you began with, what you ended with, and then the search results and a reflection on the process. So let's go, yep, next slide, thank you. So as much as I love a live OpenAI ChatGPT demo, I decided to go with screenshots. And although I think in the chat we can put a link to my larger search string that I did with ChatGPT. But I started off asking for ways I may search for scholarly journal articles on gender identity in the Latina community over the 20th century. So to start off, ChatGPT, it's just cut off at the end, but I think number like 6 is consult with a librarian. I was like, oh my God, yay, ChatGPT knows we're here. But it doesn't know anything. Remember that. It doesn't actually know anything. So it starts off saying, brainstorm keywords and key concepts related to your research, and then consider these terms. And it pulls the terms directly from my question, adding a little bit. It suggests using academic databases. That's great, although little tough, little problematic the way it describes it. And then search with
PubMed.
keywords. Yeah, I know. But this is where it's like, okay, this isn't factually accurate. It doesn't need to be factually accurate. But what it's suggesting is a larger process. And the larger process is actually good. It's just those granular suggestions aren't. So it gave me some suggestions. As I said, this is sort of mixed. It says use academic databases, but I don't love these suggestions. And then it says at the very end, enhance your search with Boolean operators and or not. And this really goes back to the way that some of these library databases are constructed, which is not ideal, but they love to section out language and use what we call keywords or subject terms to define pieces of information. So if it's an article about this topic, the best way to search for it might be Latino gender identities in 20th century or whatever. So I actually was like, how good is ChatGPT at this? Like, let's see. So if you go to the next slide, I put this in new search and it was 0 results. And we were like, wow, nothing. And then we tried it in Google Scholar, 0 results. So we definitely were like, okay, this isn't enough. We need to think, how could we use what ChatGPT already knows to give us more information, how we might have a successful search. So go ahead to the next slide, Anne. So I wanted to go ahead and what we say iterate the search. So how can we change this to make it to get to a different outcome? It didn't give me the right phrase right away, but like let's work with it. So I actually include, it's not on our sources, I'll put it on our sources, a link to this article which describes a framework for prompt engineering, and this is by a librarian who I think is at University of New Mexico. But be more concise, be logical, explicit, and adaptive and reflective. But logical, concise, and explicit is what we're going to go with here. So go to the next slide. And so we started out instead saying, oh, question? Sorry. No. Okay. We started out saying, okay, what are the synonyms for Latino, Latina? And it gave me a huge list. It went through, let's see if I can share this. It went through the like Latino, Latina, but then it said Hispanic, Chicano, Chicana, Latinx, Hispano, Hispana, Mestizo, Mestiza, Hispanophone, Latin American, South American, all the way down. So it gave me like 20 different synonyms for Latino, which is pretty good. And then I asked it for the same thing. Okay, what are your synonyms for gender identity? And it went through gender expression, gender role, gender nonconformity, gender dysphoria, transgender, cisgender, genderqueer, non-binary. All through it had like 16 different synonyms. So then I said, okay, ChatGPT, can you generate a Boolean search using those 3 synonyms for Latino, Latina, and 3 synonyms for gender identity? And it gave me what ended up being a very effective output. It said Latino, Chicano, or it could be Hispanic, Latinx, and gender identity or gender expression or non-binary. And Anne, if you go to the next slide, we went and put that into new search, and then we were like, oh my gosh, this actually yielded like 3,000, over 3,000 results. And this is, new search is not always great. We know it's not always reliable in terms of getting what you need. But by creating this Boolean search, combining synonyms and concepts 2 different ways that you're interested in, it was able to put together something that was really effective and returned articles, books, so on and so forth. So that would be an exercise for the students to say, okay, my first idea, yes, my topic might be on gender identity in the 20th century among this group of people, but what are all the different ways that has been described? And ChatGPT ended up being a really effective tool for that kind of exploration of how all these things could be combined into like a single search. So I want to go ahead and oh wait, I'll just say this too. Like the criteria for evaluating this can be totally customizable to your course. And then you can also have further engagement with either the librarians. You could have specific databases instead of just new search. You could have them using something like PubMed or using an EBSCO database or using JSTOR. And then you could also have them check for accuracy. Like, is this a good search? How many? Yeah, okay, there's 3,000 results. Is this the right thing that matches my topic? Like, have them do some reflection on the process and how effective they really were in the end. So we want to go ahead and now ask you all to think about just in the chat, or if you want to come off and say something in your mic, that's fine too. How might you promote, like, what ideas did these 2 activities spark for you? Have you been able to incorporate use of these tools in your class, or how might you incorporate these generative AI tools to promote critical thinking about sources? And go ahead and go to the next slide. And scaffold your own research assignments. So we're just interested in your feedback. If you could put anything in the chat, that would be awesome. Or again, if you want to come off and just say something off mic or off mute, that would be awesome too. But we're curious to know if this sparked anything for you.
stop sharing so that we can actually see each other. How's that? I hope the prompt is still clear.
Or if you're sitting there thinking, this would never work, we would love to hear that too. And I put so there's a comment in the chat. The search terms approach seems really helpful for the intro music tech course I taught since students had wildly different interests coming into the course and very different research backgrounds. Yeah, this kind of assignment seems like a nice way to help them when it comes to doing research for a paper. Yeah, especially discovering additional terms to look into. And adding an assignment like this gives you that chance to give feedback to students too. Like if you have sort of a mini assignment 1 week before they have to define their topics or before they get too far along, it just gives you the opportunity to say like, wait, let's go in this direction instead, or maybe you should make an appointment with a librarian, or you're doing the same thing as this other person. Like, I mean, I think it just gives you opportunities to pause and have them do some more critical analysis before the big thing is due or before a bigger assignment is due. Let's see. And I see, Chris, you'd also mentioned that yeah, just demonstrating 1 or 2 tasks could go a really long way. And um, we integrate, like we've had faculty request this sort of instruction about generative AI tools at multiple levels. And I think that the focus on just sometimes students just need that reframe. Like the focus isn't just on information, it's on finding academic information for a specific purpose. So yeah, we don't need to teach that over and over again, but once they get it, they understand. Um,
One point I will make is that students often, if they get an introduction in their first year seminar or in an introductory course, that's the source they know. So if they're introduced to a particular database in that course, that's the one they go back to for every course they take and every assignment they have, regardless of the topic of the course. So bringing it up again in the context of a specific course and a specific assignment, and encouraging students to think about other options so that they can actually use a discipline-specific database rather than one that is sort of generic, shallow, but broad. They might want to go find one that's deep or on and on, so that they're finding academic information in the discipline rather than in related or unrelated fields.
So we went through this pretty quick. Actually had a lot of content that we covered pretty fast. And we have a slide with our sources and also a slide about seeking more assistance. But we do want to reiterate that we have so many subject librarians here. I think we have about 40. So if you want, I mean, we encourage you to talk to the faculty that you work with, or if you have colleagues who are interested in this but not quite or scared of ChatGPT and what's gonna happen. We really like talking about this stuff, and we're happy to meet. We as librarians are happy to do one-on-one meetings with you as faculty to uh, do more of a deep dive based into your discipline on these topics. Yeah, I think with that, if you have any general questions about the library also, we are happy to field those questions now in addition. But thank you all for coming, and really please look from Un. She should be sending out the final emails from the practicum in the coming day or so. So please, we are interested in hearing your feedback. And it's been great. We really appreciate your attendance and attention over these weeks.
Thank you very much. Thank you, folks.